This is an idealized scientific lander approaching a small rotating companion beside a larger asteroid. We will call that small companion the moonlet. We are tracking the Scion lander. Gravity from both bodies bends its approach, small thrusters adjust its motion, and two flexible legs must bring it to rest at the green mark. A successful landing means that both feet touch, the body remains upright, and the lander stops moving relative to the surface. Our plan sends the center path to the green mark. That is not enough. The left foot arrives first, the surface pushes on that off-center point, and the push turns the chassis. The second foot misses while the lander rolls away from the orientation it needs. We are going to turn this failed touchdown into a successful one by separating the jobs that a physics engine must perform. Which change should we try first? Should we reduce the downward speed, cancel the lander's unwanted spin, or add damping to the flexible legs? Choose the repair that seems most urgent.
I would reduce the downward speed first. A gentler contact should give the legs more time to settle.
That is a reasonable choice, but each option repairs a different failure. We will change one thing at a time, preserve every failed result, and then combine only the changes that the complete landing actually needs. The failed lander is frozen just after its first foot touches the rotating moonlet. We will call its rectangular main body the chassis. To explain the failure, the simulator must remember more than the center path. Position tells us where the chassis center is. Velocity tells us how that center is moving. Forces change the center's momentum, and the accumulated velocity changes its position. Orientation tells us which way the chassis faces. Angular velocity tells us how quickly that direction is turning. Torque changes angular momentum, so an off-center contact can rotate the lander even when its center follows the intended path. Each foot also has a position and a velocity. The changing distance between a foot and its chassis anchor tells us how much its landing leg is compressed and how quickly that compression is changing. We will call the landing successful only when both feet remain in contact. The chassis is nearly aligned with the local surface, and its remaining linear and angular motion are small. This is a planar Newtonian teaching model. The chassis is rigid, the legs are ideal springs and dampers, the moonlet surface is circular, and the two asteroid centers follow prescribed motion. Fuel use, surface grains, three-dimensional tumbling, and guidance design are outside this model. The lander begins above a marked point on the rotating moonlet. Before a foot can touch, the center path must meet that moving point with a manageable velocity. The larger asteroid pulls the lander one way, while the nearby moonlet pulls more strongly toward its own center. These are separate interaction laws. Newton's second law does not invent either force. It adds the forces we chose to model. The displayed total force changes the lander's momentum. Under our constant mass assumption, that changes velocity. The velocity accumulated over time then changes position. A force arrow does not point along the entire future path. Symmetric thrusters add a controlled force through the chassis center. The programmed thrust history bends the approach and reduces the closing speed without directly turning the body. The magenta path reaches the target quickly. The green path reaches the same moving site with a smaller inward speed. The position goal is the same, but the state at arrival is different. Slowing the approach reduces the energy that the legs and contact must absorb. It does not remove the tilt or the unwanted spin, so the speed repair cannot finish the landing by itself. The slower center path now reaches the moonlet gently, but the chassis is still tilted and spinning. We need to change orientation without spoiling the repaired path. One thruster pushes at a point away from the center. Its force changes linear momentum, and its offset creates a torque that changes angular momentum. The perpendicular distance from the center to the force line is the moment arm. Which thruster pattern can turn the chassis without changing the motion of its center? Should both sides push the same way? Should one side push alone? Or should the two sides push in opposite directions? Choose the pattern now.
The two sides should push in opposite directions. Their total force can cancel while their turning effects add.
That pair is called a force couple. Its net force is zero, but its net torque is not zero. A brief programmed couple removes the excess angular velocity. It aligns the chassis with the outward direction perpendicular to the local surface. The corrected lander arrives upright, but it still reaches the surface too fast in this test. Good orientation prevents the one-foot flip. It does not decide whether the legs rebound. The upright lander now reaches the surface with both feet, but the first test still rebounds. The flexible legs have stored the incoming motion and returned too much of it. When a leg becomes shorter than its rest length, its spring produces a restoring force. The same compression stores elastic potential energy, which is energy held in the deformed spring. Kinetic energy is the energy associated with motion. Without another transfer, the stored spring energy can become upward kinetic energy and launch the chassis again. What should a damper do during compression and extension? Should it resist the leg's motion in both directions? Should it add another restoring force based only on length? Or should it act only after the foot leaves the ground? Choose one mechanism.
The damper should resist the leg's motion in both directions. That would reduce the ringing instead of changing the leg's preferred length.
That is the distinction. The spring force depends on displacement from the rest length. The damping force depends on the rate of compression. In this resolved model, damping transfers mechanical energy into unmodeled internal motion instead of storing it for a later rebound. With little damping, the upright chassis compresses both legs and rises again. With the chosen damping, the oscillation shrinks. The leg stiffness still controls how far the legs compress, while the damping controls how quickly the motion settles. These are ideal linear springs and dampers. Real landing gear has joints, stops, nonlinear materials, and damage limits. The simplified legs are sufficient only for the question we are testing here. The damped legs can absorb motion, but they need a surface force to compress them. That force must appear only when a foot reaches the rotating moonlet. For 1 foot, the shortest line from the moonlet center defines the outward surface normal. The signed gap measures the remaining separation along that normal. A positive gap means the foot is clear of the surface. When the gap closes and the foot would move into the surface, the contact model produces an outward force. When the foot separates, that force returns to zero. The surface is allowed to push, but this contact rule is not allowed to pull the lander back. The moonlet rotates under the feet. Therefore, the relevant sideways speed is the foot's velocity relative to the moving surface, not its velocity relative to the screen. The tangential contact force opposes that relative sliding, but its magnitude is capped by a declared fraction of the outward force. This simplified bound can stop a small slip without inventing unlimited grip. With the normal and tangential directions defined at each foot, both legs can load without visible penetration. The same contact forces also create torques about the chassis center, so contact and rotation must be solved together. Every ingredient for the landing is now present, but a long list of forces is not yet evidence that the calculation is trustworthy. We must keep 4 different decisions separate. The initial state says where the lander begins and how it is moving. The force laws say how gravity, thrust, springs, and damping act. The contact rule says which motions the surface resists. The numerical method says how those continuous rules are approximated in finite steps. At each step, the engine adds every external force on the selected body and adds each force's turning effect about the center. The force sum updates linear motion. The torque sum updates angular motion. The calculation then advances the chassis center, orientation, 2 foot positions, and all of their velocities. The explicit midpoint method evaluates the forces halfway through the step before applying the full update. A smaller step is a numerical choice, not a new physical force. We reran the complete successful landing with a step of 1/1000th of a normalized second. Then we used 1/2 and 1/4 of that step. All 3 runs finish with both feet in contact. The maximum surface overlap stays below 4 parts in 10,000 of the moonlet radius. The center paths differ by less than 1 part in a million of that radius. For this fixture, the displayed result has converged at the scale we can see. Convergence supports this numerical calculation under this model. It does not prove that the idealized surface, springs, friction rule, or prescribed controls describe a real mission accurately. We can now test the opening choices against the same rotating moonlet. Each run begins from the declared approach and changes only the named repair. Reducing the inward speed makes the first contact gentler, but the tilted chassis still reaches 1 foot first and continues to turn. The speed repair solves the wrong part of this failure. Correcting the attitude lets both feet arrive together, but the fast underdamped legs store the impact energy and return it. The upright lander rebounds away from the surface. Increasing the leg damping removes much of the ringing, but it cannot erase the original tilt and spin. The damped 1 foot contact still turns the chassis. Now the slower approach and corrected attitude act together. The damped legs work with contact that pushes only while a foot presses inward. Friction resists sideways slip only up to its declared limit. Both feet load. The leg oscillations shrink while the chassis approaches rest and follows the rotating surface. No single magic equation selected this outcome. The successful landing is the joint consequence of the initial state, the force laws, the contact rule, and the numerical update. The first landing succeeds near the top of the moonlet. Now, we move the green target to a steeper part of the same rotating surface. Before we rerun the engine, what must change? Is it enough to keep the old center path, or must we retune both the arrival velocity and the chassis orientation for the new surface normal and surface motion? Choose between those two plans.
We must retune both quantities. The new point moves in a different direction, and an upright chassis there has a different orientation.
The old plan still lands near the old location. Relative to the new target, it arrives on the wrong line and carries the wrong orientation. Reusing a successful trajectory without its boundary conditions does not make it a successful transfer. We rotate the planned approach to the new outward normal. We also match the tangential velocity of that moving surface point. The physical rules and the numerical time step remain unchanged. The retuned run settles with both feet at the new site. The transfer works because we changed the initial and controlled state that the new geometry requires, not because we added a new force. Let us remove the diagrams and replay the complete calculated landing in one continuous view. The larger asteroid and moonlet follow their prescribed binary motion. The Cyan lander approaches the rotating target, the programmed thrusters shape its linear and angular motion, and the camera follows it toward the surface. Both feet touch. The springs compress. Damping removes the visible oscillation, and bounded friction lets the lander follow the moving ground. A physics engine is not one formula that knows what should happen. It is a declared state, a collection of force laws and constraints, and a numerical method whose consequences we can test. This idealized landing is not flight guidance and not a detailed asteroid surface model. It is something more useful for our purpose, one complete, inspectable Newtonian claim. We built the landing by asking each equation to do one clear job and by checking the combined result instead of trusting the pieces separately. If you want to look inside the numerical stepper that advanced every state in this landing, continue with the differential equations without the tricks playlist. It shows how a local rule for change becomes a computed path, and why the stepping method can preserve or distort the physics.